ghosts, UFOs, monsters, Mothman, Chupacabra, the Mandela effect. This and more you will find at the Fringe feature movie hour. All this and more at the Fringe feature movie hour. I will try to scare the pants off of you. Enjoy. Good night. Hello everybody. This is the Fringe feature movie hour. Tonight we will be discussing, is Alchemy dead? Alchemy is the process, as far as I know, so far, of only making the mystical object called the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is one of the most sought after mystical items in our world, supposedly. I guess the Middle Eastern people, before they had the tendency of wanting to kill everybody, or not everyone, I'm not being discriminatory here, but before all that nonsense happened and they believed in religions, in this video I'm going to show you, the Middle Eastern folks were all about science and the alchemy. They were actually the leading leading area of alchemy at one time, which I kind of find it hard to believe, seeing the state they are in now. I like them more as a scientific people than the bloodthirsty the way a lot of them are today. Watching this video has opened my eyes about the Middle East, and I have a newfound respect for their people. I wish they got back to the state of knowledge and progress that they used to live in. But like last week I discussed the Archons. The Archons probably destroyed their culture like everybody else's, like they did my ancestors, the Native Americans, and wiped them out, They probably sent those gods over there to make the new religion of Islam to basically stop their golden age of progress and science, It's just an idea. It's not, truth or fact that I know of, but it's just a thought. And since we're talking about Archons, or I decided to talk about Archons, I just want to say everything I discussed last week I feel is true. I've dealt with these bastards my whole life, and I wouldn't lead you astray. They're as real as a heart attack, and I didn't produce that video to scare you or to be gloom and doom. I'm just producing facts. They are a threat to our world. I don't know if they're the biggest threat, but they're a pretty damn big one, and they're hell-bent on destroying this planet. I mean, call me a liar, but just look around. I mean, every city has, proof of archonic rot. I mean, it seems to be everywhere, and I'm not a liar in saying that the end game of this rot of every city, in America and in the world, is basically going to lead down to the whole entire earth being destroyed. It sounds crazy, but from what the Gnostics say, that's their end game. They hate Sophia, they want her dead, and I believe from what I heard, Sophia wanted to escape all these Archons, so, she moved here, according to what I've read or watched videos on. this is the only place safe. This is a safe haven from the Archons in our whole entire, you know, galaxy, or solar system or whatever, and all the rest of the planets like Mars and all the rest of them are inhabited by these creatures. That's probably why we never return to places like the moon, because these creatures inhabit that area. Well, anyways, I just wanted to talk about that real fast, and I'll go back to alchemy. Sorry about the little distraction there. Well, anyways, alchemy has been a huge subject throughout history. I mean, people have died trying to perfect its formula. It's all, like, the horror story continues. Planet Earth. This is part of the horror story, the part that's scary about alchemy. It may not be a scary topic, but in this video discuss how many people died just to try to perfect its formula and get it right. I don't know how many people actually got it right, but they talk about what's his name, Lee and Kelly getting together and trying to get this stone together, and everything, and they split. I mean, this also causes relation split, trying to get these artifacts perfected and all that, and it was just a mess. They say that Kelly actually was successful, but nobody really knows. But and nowadays, they also talk about today. It's like, today, if you talk about alchemy, you'll get laughed at, or probably blackballed, or who knows what will happen to you if you talk about alchemy today. I know it's probably frowned upon in the universities and stuff, but I mean, I encourage people to actually try it. I mean, I wanted to try it myself. There was a point in my life where I just couldn't find a job, and I have this book called The Book of Aquarius, and I somehow luckily stumbled upon, and if anybody wants a copy, message me at either Fringe Feature Movie Hour or GVideo 34 and Gatefleck TV, and I'll be happy to give you a copy of this ebook that I stumbled upon, which talks about the process of alchemy, which is a natural process of the world. I mean, not to get funny here, but going to the bathroom, or eating and then going to the bathroom, is a natural process of alchemy. Same thing with other parts of, other things in the world, like when it rains and turns to the sun, and when fossil fuel turns into oil, that's a process of alchemy. That's what alchemy really is, according to this book I read. It's a natural process of what the earth already does, and that's what they try to do in alchemy, is emulate the natural process of the earth that's already going on. But in my book, he basically, it's like a secret thing. I don't even know if the guy perfected the formula. It says that he wrote the book. If it's a guy, I don't know if it's a girl, it could be. It said they wrote the book before they even considered performing alchemy and getting the Philosopher's Stone. But they write down the process of how it's done, and you're going to be surprised, and I'll unveil what the secret is of alchemy right here. So, believe it or not, that the secret of alchemy in the book is your urine. Yeah, but it's not just any urine. It's like a urine that you piss out right after you get up from sleeping. It's like supposed to be the most natural state of urine at that possible time, and you're supposed to collect like so much of it. I think it's like a gallon worth or something, and then eventually you go on to basically cooking it out. I have no knowledge of alchemy, but I guess you're supposed to leave it on a burner for like 6 months. I would love to learn how to do stuff like that, but I was so desperate that one time that I was out of work and no job at all would call me, and I almost considered doing it. I mean, if I had the proper tools, it would have been great, but I got a job now, and I'm happy I didn't have to go through all that crazy process of doing alchemy, but I was really desperate. I wasn't as desperate to rob somebody, but I was pretty damn desperate. I would have tried anything, any fringe form of method of trying to get money I would have done at the time, and this was one of them. And I'm glad things are a little bit better. I mean, not perfect for me, but I like things to be a lot better. But what are you gonna do? Well, I guess that's all I can think of now of alchemy. You enjoy the show, and you have a great Saturday night, and I'll see you next Saturday, and we'll talk about more of this scary fringe stuff, and you guys have a great night.
An ancient secret linked to sorcery and black magic, hidden in haunting images and enigmatic code. It is said to be a source of immense power, boundless wealth, and even immortality. Was the secret an elaborate hoax? Or are there scientific truths concealed within these ancient manuscripts? Is there a formula that will finally reveal the real Sorcerer's Stone? The legends are numerous. Firstly, there is a mysterious stone said to possess incredible powers. Did it ever really exist? Americans first heard of it from the children's novel Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But it has been known in Britain since ancient times as the Philosopher's Stone.
I imagine it was called the Sorcerer's Stone in America, partly because it has echoes of Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but also because it has a link with magic, with sorcery.
From the time of the ancient world, a philosopher was a seeker after wisdom and truth, a sage who endeavored to unlock the secrets of the natural world. The Philosopher's Stone was said to be the key to his understanding of the cosmos. For thousands of years, the search for the stone obsessed the Western world. No object except the Holy Grail was more venerated. The first accounts of the Philosopher's Stone date from approximately Christ's time on Earth, but it is clear from the way the documents are written that the stone had been known about for much longer than that.
The earliest mention of it I've managed to unearth is a treatise attributed to Maria the Jewess. That's probably from somewhere between 1 and 300 AD, and she's already talking of the Philosopher's Stone and its efficacy in transforming base metals into gold.
The ability to make gold was a dream that harked back 1,000 years earlier to the Greek myth of King Midas, who turned everything he touched into it with disastrous consequences. However, the Midas touch is an alluring idea that still beguiles us today.
Think about a person who could make gold. They could rule the world, they could tear down all the social and political structures that have been built up simply by being able to produce massive amounts of money out of lead or iron or copper.
But the Philosopher's Stone was said to have one other and even more astonishing power.
The effect of the Philosopher's Stone on the human body, supposedly, was that it could extend human life to its utmost extent.
It could potentially make the holder of the Philosopher's Stone immortal.
A single substance that could grant whoever possessed it both eternal life and boundless wealth. So what exactly was the Philosopher's Stone?
The definition of the philosopher's stone is also extremely obscure. It is often said the stone is the most common thing on earth and the most rare. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's the most difficult thing to do, yet it's child's play.
Though described in mystical and ambiguous terms, it is clear that the stone is not actually a stone, and it is not something that can be unearthed by archaeologists or discovered by adventurers. It is, instead, something that must be created by altruistic seekers after truth and passionate men of science.
The philosopher's stone is not a solid, rocky substance, but a compound substance that would have been a kind of almost a liquid or a gel.
The commonest description is that it's an unusually heavy red powder, or sometimes a red stone or a red globule. But you also encounter it as a yellow, waxy material, perhaps something like amber.
It was Middle Eastern philosophers writing in the 6th, 7th and 8th centuries AD who first asserted that some among them had found the secret. They claimed to know the ingredients for making the compound that was the philosopher's stone, and to have mastered the dangerous chemical processes necessary to amalgamate them. About this time, another word began to be used to describe these seekers after the stone's marvels: alchemists, a word with both Greek and Arabic associations. Sometime after the start of the Crusades in the 1100s, which resulted in increased movement of people and ideas between East and West, tales of the philosopher's stone first reached Europe. They originated in the ancient Jewish, Egyptian and Greek texts translated by the Muslim scholars who had made alchemy a department of their scientific study.
The Arabs led the world at that time in the development of mathematics, in alchemy, and in medicine. They had the greatest doctors in the world at that time and the best medical schools.
The idea of the philosopher's stone soon captured the imagination of European scholars. Armed with fresh translations of the Oriental texts, they began their own quest to produce the stone. But the mission had to be veiled in secrecy.
In all the ages in which alchemy was practiced, it was regarded as what in medieval times was called a mystery. That is, a craft that you learned by apprenticing yourself, and not something whose secrets were to be broadcast.
Like all secret societies, the medieval alchemists used symbols and coded scripts that baffle experts to this day.
People pick up a book of alchemy from the early modern period, and it just seems like mumbo jumbo. It's full of symbolism and pictures and strange little glyphs. And what we have to remember is that alchemy comes to us through a craft tradition. People in the craft tradition had ways of maintaining the secrecy of their skills, the secrecy of their knowledge. They did this by using symbols, by using a specialized language.
While many alchemists recorded their formulae and step-by-step procedures for making the compound known as the philosopher's stone, the ingredients they used remain hidden in symbolic language.
The problem is that many of these experiments involve materials that are not explicitly defined. They're given names, but we don't have a correspondence for what those names are.
For instance, a green lion swallowing the sun. Well, this really means that there's an acid which is dissolving sulfur. You have a peacock inside a flask. The peacock's tail represents an iridescent color which alchemists believe forms in their flasks just before they produce the red elixir or the philosopher's stone.
Those who have studied these alchemical accounts believe that one of the ingredients used to make the philosopher's stone is mercury, either in its pure form or modified in some way. The other ingredients, some quite risque, are the subject of continuing heated debate. But it is clear that whatever the mixture contains, it must be repeatedly purified and transformed by fire.
But you also go through different phases which are indicated by different colors. So you start off with black, which then moves into white, then into yellow, and then finally into red. And when you reach the red stage, that is imminent before the production of the Philosopher's Stone.
And it changed its essence and its substance so many times that in a way it now contained all essences, all substances, all transformations. And that's why people believe that the Philosopher's Stone, once it was achieved, would then have the possibility of transforming anything it touched instantly, because it held within its compound all of the transformative processes in the natural world.
It was the promise of this ultimate power that made the search for the stone so tempting and so perilous.
Trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, the secret of transmuting the metals, was so difficult that in absolute desperation there might be some alchemists out there that appealed to supernatural agencies like demons in order to get that kind of knowledge.
Over the centuries, seekers after the stone would pore over arcane texts, consult rabbis, sages, and even angels. They would ingest poisons, risk madness, face imprisonment, exile, and disgrace. A select few, it would be whispered, were actually successful. To create a sorcerer's stone that changes base metal into gold and an elixir that can bestow immortality. Today, these notions are the stuff of fantasy, consigned to fictional realms where wizards weave spells. But for 300 years, until the late 1600s, the golden age of Western alchemy, these objectives were considered logical and attainable.
Actually, science and magic, at least in the early stages of civilization, were not as disparate, were not as distinct as we now think they are. If you think about it critically, in magic, you take a series of objects and produce something totally unexpected from them. In science, you can be doing very similar looking things.
European scientists of the 13th century, men known as alchemists, took up the quest for the Philosopher's Stone. This mysterious compound, they believed, could be made into an elixir which conferred immortality, or added to base metals like lead to produce gold. Though their objectives appear occult to our rationalist eyes, they had solid scientific reasons for believing it was possible.
In working with metals, it's very easy to change one or two of the properties. For example, we can take copper and make it yellow like gold or white like silver. We can change the hardness and softness of metals. So alchemists naturally made the extension. If we can change one or two of the properties, can we change all the properties?
If we do this right, if we choose the right ingredients, if our conditions are right, then we can take a mixture of something else and apply a particular material to it and make something that really is gold.
The alchemists called the concept transmutation, a process they saw at work all around them.
If we look at nature around us, it's dynamic. Things are always turning one thing into another. So grape juice turning into wine and then into vinegar, or in the organic world, caterpillars turning into butterflies. So if this sort of change is normal in the natural world, why shouldn't it be in the world of minerals as well?
The ancients had the belief that this was also true of things that grew in the earth. That is to say that base metals might slowly in the earth turn into more noble metals, might turn into gold.
Just as you could maybe speed it up by putting a plant in a pot on a windowsill, you could speed up the process by taking metals, minerals, putting them in a pot, using a steady heat, maybe a higher heat than would be experienced in the center of the earth, and essentially just speeding up what was a natural organic growth process.
If alchemists could, with the help of the Philosopher's Stone, speed up the aging process by which they believed lead matured into gold, then, logically, they should be able to slow that aging process as well.
What brings it all together is a desire to manipulate time.
In the alchemical mind, the same purification process that could turn base metal into gold could also create longevity, and perhaps even immortality.
Just as it could remove the impurities of the metal and perfect them into gold, so too some European alchemists thought that the Philosopher's Stone could be a powerful medicine, that it would remove the impurities and the imbalances from our bodies and restore us to perfect health.
The transmutation of gold was simply a sign that they had been successful in their work, which was to transform nature, but also to transform themselves and ultimately to attain immortality.
Alchemists created the prototype of the modern laboratory in order to combine and heat the volatile chemicals to a very high temperature. It was a time-consuming and dangerous process.
First of all, alchemy constantly uses quicksilver, mercury, as one of the materials that goes into the making of the Philosopher's Stone.
There are a lot of hazards of working with mercury. One is that it can cause personality changes and mental aberration. It does have a certain toxicity. If you inhale the vapors, it can make your teeth fall out and give you the shakes.
They had furnaces that were within their labs, and those furnaces used charcoal. So there was always the hazard of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Creating the elixir of life, the liquid form of the Philosopher's Stone, required mixing a potion of heavy metals that the alchemist himself would ingest, intentionally or otherwise.
They would handle these chemicals not only without precautions, but without even any knowledge that they were noxious or toxic. In the pursuit of the great elixir of life, they were, in fact, damaging their health and probably shortening their lifespan by decades.
And for alchemists, there were hazards outside the lab as well as inside it.
The true alchemists were not generally interested in broadcasting even their successes very far abroad because of the danger of kidnap and of torture to get their secrets out of them.
If the secret of the Philosopher's Stone got out, they could manufacture an untold amount of precious metals and destabilize not only the currency market in their own country, but in the entire world. It's one of the reasons why alchemy is illegal in most early modern states. Most monarchs don't want alchemists running around doing their own thing.
Throughout history, hundreds of scholars have searched for the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. Some were the finest minds of their day, for example, Roger Bacon, the father of modern chemistry, and Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist of the 17th century. But none fired the public imagination more than Nicholas Flamel. Though he is now a character in popular works of fiction like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, to medieval readers he was a real, if inscrutable, person.
I was actually with an octogenarian alchemist in Paris some years ago. He showed me this book, which actually was a copy of a book attributed to Nicholas Flamel.
Scientific and alchemical writings attributed to Flamel turn up in books published in the 1500s that are thought to be compilations of earlier works. Though his contributions in these tomes are minor, Flamel himself becomes larger than life in the hands of modern fiction writers. In the Da Vinci Code, Flamel is said to be a luminary of the Priory of Sion. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, he is cast as the alchemist partner of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Both authors were, no doubt, inspired by the same book, a volume on hieroglyphical figures that was published in Paris in 1612. Claiming to be a copy of Flamel's own long-lost composition, it describes his search for the Philosopher's Stone 3 centuries earlier. It is this account that became woven into a larger and enduring mythos.
His story has all the elements that will make a great movie.
Nicholas Flamel was born near Paris around 1330. As a young man, he made a living as a public scrivener, copying and authenticating letters and documents. Over time, he built up a modest business buying and selling manuscripts. His life and his fate changed abruptly when he found and bought a strange book.
It consisted of 21 leaves, 3 times 7, both magical numbers. And on these leaves were inscribed mostly figures rather than writing, but figures that clearly linked the book to the alchemical writings.
It turned out to contain nothing less than the formula for creating the most powerful substance known to medieval man, the Philosopher's Stone, a compound and a catalyst that could transform base metal into gold and produce an elixir which could extend life itself. Flamel studied the book for more than 20 years, trying to decipher the coded symbols and the arcane script. He didn't get far.
Some of the writing in the book was Hebrew, and he wanted to get an interpretation of this book desperately. However, at that time in France, there were not very many Jews. They'd been expelled.
Sometime around 1378, Flamel went on a pilgrimage to Spain, where there was both a large Jewish population and a long-standing alchemical tradition. On the return journey, he met a former rabbinical scholar and physician to whom he showed a page from his mysterious book. It was sufficient for the old man to make a positive identification. It was, he insisted, a copy of the original Book of Abraham. It took years, but using the translated page as a guide, Flamel, assisted by his wife, eventually decoded the book's recipe for the Philosopher's Stone. According to the account contained in hieroglyphical figures, Flamel successfully used the stone to create silver in 1382 and gold shortly afterwards.
Finally, he succeeded. He made substantial quantities of gold, according to his own account.
There seemed to be proof to back up this claim. Though he was only a poor scrivener, Flamel eventually constructed several buildings, one of which still stands today in Paris. And a biography published in 1761 included a list of the sizable bequests he made to the poor, taken from public records.
He opened poorhouses around Paris and spent a lot of money on feeding the poor and helping the poor.
Those who read Flamel's surviving works, and the book alleged to be his own narrative of his alchemical triumphs, accepted that this was proof that he had indeed used the Philosopher's Stone to make gold, only to give it all away.
People thought that he had succeeded because all of a sudden this poor Parisian scrivener or clerk has all this money. Where did the money come from?
Alchemy could be an explanation for otherwise unexplainable wealth. But his money didn't come from alchemical transmutations. It came from very clever real estate speculations and from the fact that his wife came from 2 previous marriages with a considerable inheritance.
Flamel was said to have survived into his 80s, no mean feat in the Middle Ages. He commissioned his own tombstone, decorated with obscure symbols, sometime about 1410. His death is thought to have occurred sometime soon after, but perhaps in 1418. But rumors later began to circulate that he had used the Philosopher's Stone to prolong his life, and he had faked death to protect the secret. This story gained credence by the fact that several new books bearing his name were published long after his supposed demise.
These showed up in the 16th and 17th centuries. Whoever wrote them, however, just put Nicholas Flamel's name on it because he had become a famous figure mythologically for alchemy by this time. And some of them were probably just written by booksellers or cobbled together by booksellers trying to get a good seller.
But some people, then as now, believed the tales and clung to any evidence, however flimsy, that the Philosopher's Stone might be real and that Flamel lives on. In the 1500s, that belief would be put to the test when one of the most powerful crowned heads of Europe assembled dozens of alchemists at his court, with instructions to find, once and for all, the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. From the frenzied research that resulted from his invitation came exotic tales of angels and an oncoming apocalypse, along with more earthly whispers of fraud, torture, and wife-swapping. Throughout the medieval period and what is called the early modern era of the 16th and 17th centuries, the most powerful people in Europe kept a weather eye out for anyone who might have the power to create the Philosopher's Stone. The substance was seen as a potential wild card, something that might influence the constant wars and discord between countries or encourage threats and dissension from within.
The kings and cardinals, nobles and popes were all interested in alchemy, firstly because it was the mainstream science at the time, but also, of course, it gave the great prospect of untold riches, and they wanted to have the riches for themselves.
Though European rulers frequently outlawed the practice of alchemy altogether, there was always one exception: the alchemist who worked for them.
Most monarchs really are not adverse to the idea of alchemy itself. They're just adverse to alchemy falling into the hands of the wrong people. So a crown-sponsored alchemist was a great asset.
No monarch was more interested in alchemy than Rudolf II, the Habsburg ruler of the Holy Roman Empire and King of Bohemia and Hungary. Prone to melancholy, Rudolf was drawn to alchemy perhaps as a cure for his misery, or simply because it relieved the tedium he found in affairs of state.
Now, Rudolf is known to have been very interested in alchemy. Not only did he acquire several books on the topic, but also he engaged himself in alchemical transmutation.
He was the Holy Roman Emperor, who was meant to represent the interests of the Vatican, and in fact was more interested in pursuing forbidden knowledge, occult knowledge.
In the mid-1500s, Rudolf began to invite alchemists to his court openly. As many as 200 attended him in Prague, where he conducted his own alchemical experiments.
He gathered together some of the greatest minds of Europe and made Prague the intellectual and cultural center, and set up laboratories throughout the Prague castle.
It's probably fair to say that if you were an alchemist in that period of time, in late 16th century, early 17th century, a visit to the Habsburg was certainly something that would improve your career. He oftentimes went down to his workshop that was located right there at the castle. The fact that Rudolf, who is at this time the emperor, would engage in alchemical practices seemed to many people to be below his status. What is a prince doing in a workshop? You know, he's supposed to be the head of state.
Among those invited to Rudolf's court was Dr. John Dee, a respected Cambridge scholar at the court of Elizabeth I. Dee, like many great minds of the time, had a strong interest in alchemy and the power of the philosopher's stone. It came gradually to be a fixation that dominated his life.
Dee's interest in the philosopher's stone began, as far as we can tell, way back when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge University, when he began an extensive reading program in the great classic works of alchemy. He read Flamel, and he came to believe at this point that alchemy had the potential to unlock the secrets of how the world was put together.
But by 1580, Dee had achieved no success at transmutation at all.
And for Dee, this seems to have been the moment when he began to cast around for a better, more reliable way to learn about the natural world. And it was at that moment that he felt God revealed to him a new path.
So Dee put away his beakers and crucibles and turned to what was known as a scrying crystal.
There was a widespread belief in early modern Europe that shiny objects could be stared into by someone who was uniquely sensitive to picking up sort of the messages that were reflected there. What Dee discovered, much to his chagrin, was that he was not one of those sensitive people.
For the experiment to work, Dee needed a partner.
You had to rely on a technician, another person who could see in those shiny objects. And he had a number of these technicians that are called scryers. The one that he seems to have had for the most time was Edward Kelly, a man of very murky origins that we don't know all that much about.
It is alleged that Kelly adopted several assumed names and that his ears had been mutilated, something that in medieval times might have indicated a conviction for counterfeiting or fraud. But he also had a thorough knowledge of mysticism and alchemy, something Dr. Dee would have appreciated.
That Dee was either extremely gullible or Kelly was very cunning, but probably both. But he insinuated himself into Dee's family and became his irreplaceable assistant.
During the course of marathon scrying sessions, Dee filled page after page with the angelic messages that Kelly relayed to him.
What happens is that the scryer describes seeing a great plane of crystal, and on that surface of crystal there are letters inscribed, and an angel stands on this sort of floor of crystal with a stick and spells out their message to Dee. Sometimes in English, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in a completely different angelic language. So this was an enormously time and labor-intensive activity, and it's not something anybody would have taken on unless they truly believed that it had the power to reveal very deep and very profound secrets about the natural world.
And the angels didn't disappoint. Through Kelly, they revealed to John Dee an incredible vision of the future.
The angels tell Dee and Kelly that after a period of 7 years of study and revelation, that they will be able to produce the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone that he and Kelly will produce in their laboratory will not just be a medicine, will not just be something that can perfect the natural world, but will actually bring about the long-awaited apocalypse, will bring about the transformation of the world and usher people into the land of peace and plenty, a second paradise on earth.
In the middle of this intense 7-year project, Rudolf II invited Dee and Kelly to his court in Prague. But just before they left England, the relationship between the two men began to deteriorate. It was shaken by a particularly disturbing message from the angels.
The angels tell Dee and Kelly that one of the things they need to do in order to make the Philosopher's Stone is that they have to share all things between themselves equally, and this even includes their wives. But a few days later in his diary, Dee notes down, "Pactum factum," the pact is real. So which indicates that the two men did swap their wives and did actually physically consummate their relationship.
The consummation of the pact seems to have fractured an already strained relationship.
Kelly's interests were more and more turning to alchemy. He wanted to spend more time in Rudolf II's laboratories and less time in Dee's room looking into a crystal ball.
Their sponsor, Rudolf II, also began to distance himself from Dee's angelic interactions.
Rudolf really became concerned about the association with demonic magic. Maybe he was now engaging in something that crossed the line from natural magic and moved into demonic magic. And as a result, he actually banned John Dee from his court, but not before finding out what he could from him.
In 1589, Dee and his wife returned to England. There, the 7-year deadline, the date by which the angels had promised the great secret of the stone would be revealed, came and went.
Dee writes, "All is false. All of the promises that the angels have made to me are nothing. The end of the world is not coming." His fondest hopes about what alchemy and what angels can do to bring about a new world of peace and prosperity have come to absolutely nothing.
In despair, Dee burned reams of his angel transcripts and abandoned his search for the Philosopher's Stone. Meanwhile, in Prague, Kelly's star was rising. He claimed that he alone possessed the key to transmutation.
He's given a title, he's given access to the laboratory spaces, he's given his own assistants for the very first time. People begin to whisper that he's found the Philosopher's Stone and that he is mounting up a huge store of riches.
Did Edward Kelly withhold this last secret from John Dee? Or was it all just an elaborate fraud designed to fool Rudolf II? Either way, Kelly was destined to pay a high price for his proud boast. By the early 1500s, the printing press was helping to spread the word about the Philosopher's Stone all across Europe. Over the century, dozens of eyewitness accounts appeared, telling of an alchemical process that could change ordinary metals into precious gold.
One of the things in the 17th century that developed was the increase in the number of accounts of transmutation, that is, transmutation histories.
Many of these transmutation demonstrations were often accompanied by a medallion that had been cast by the alchemist. And these have been retained, so we have actual pieces of these transmutations.
Were these witnesses finally observing real proof of the existence of the Philosopher's Stone, or something altogether more fraudulent?
They had all kinds of very ingenious tricks. They would do a fake transmutation. And that was usually accomplished on a small scale by such means as having crucibles with two bottoms, one of which would melt away to release gold that was hidden in the bottom, or using a wand to stir the mixture with, which would again melt away and deposit some gold. Anyone who has seen a good modern magician knows how easy it is to dupe people.
But even observers who were skeptical couldn't just come out and say so.
Oftentimes, there might be a demonstration at a castle in front of persons that would be of importance. What happens is you have persons whose dignity and whose status cannot be assuaged, that person's truth-saying ability is beyond reproach. One of the difficulties, if you're a skeptic, is on the one hand, you could claim, okay, the person didn't really do a proper transmutation. But if indeed the emperor had seen that transmutation, in effect, it would be almost like calling that emperor a liar. And there are social constraints about doing such a thing.
It was during this period that bogus alchemists made a living by claiming to possess the stone and selling portions of it to gullible buyers and then slipping silently out of town. But there were other, more elaborate ruses, often perpetrated at the expense of royalty and nobility.
The script would go as follows. That was my last piece of the Philosopher's Stone. This is a work that takes months, if not years, to perfect. I'm going to have to live at your court. I'm going to need this material, that material, the other material. I'm going to have to get assistance and so on. And so the game would be prolonged for an extended time. Some of these alchemists got away with it for extended periods and then picked up their tents and left quietly. Others exhausted the patience of their patron and would be imprisoned, tortured, executed for their failure to produce.
This may have been the fate of Edward Kelly, who continued to work in the court laboratory of Rudolf II.
He may have been too good of an alchemist for his own good, because people begin to whisper that he's found the Philosopher's Stone and that he is mounting up a huge store of riches in his own private bank accounts.
He was imprisoned, and whilst in prison, Rudolf tried to extract from him the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, or at least his agents tried to do that.
What happened to Kelly remains the subject of debate.
He tried to escape, and it seemed that he broke first one leg and then the other.
Some people say he was pushed. Some people believe that Rudolf II concocted the story of Kelly's tragic death to cover up the fact that he'd actually fled Prague to parts unknown with his alchemical secrets. What we know is that we don't hear anything more of Edward Kelly after that time at Rudolf's court.
Rudolf himself also may have had cause to regret his involvement with the quest for the stone. For many years, it was whispered that the emperor was driven to madness, either because of his obsession with alchemy or because he drank or ingested the toxic potions himself.
So there's been some serious questions about his mental health, although it's hard to attribute that really to alchemy.
He suffered from inherent melancholy, which today we would call manic depression. His obsessive search for the Philosopher's Stone did, in a way, end in a personal disaster, because he had failure to find it I think only increased his depression.
By 1606, Rudolf had lost his throne. He was found unfit to rule and replaced by his brother. Alchemy's fashionable reputation also went into a steep decline.
The backlash against alchemists came from various civic authorities or even national authorities banning the practice of alchemy. It was really more a secular backlash against citizens being defrauded.
After the Renaissance, alchemy began to be called chemistry. Though both words are derived from the same Greek root cheo, chemistry eventually became the more popular term and was in the end a way for scientists to distance themselves from the imputation of fraud and black magic that continued to taint the study of alchemy.
Down to about the end of the 17th century, the words alchemy and chemistry were synonymous. They were used largely interchangeably. It only comes later, in the 18th century, that the two split into pretty much their modern meanings.
People began to decouple alchemy from chemistry and began to associate chemistry with the kinds of assaying and weighing and quantitative methods, and also the interest in qualities of chemicals, from alchemy, which they now started to speak of as only the transmutatory art of turning base metals into gold. There is a kind of artificial divide between alchemy and chemistry.
Where chemistry is a modern science, and alchemy is this sort of shady, somewhat disreputable practice that you really don't want to be involved with.
For the last 200 years, scientists who have looked back on the period have deemed the search for the Philosopher's Stone a fool's quest, and alchemy itself a pseudo-science. But that assessment is changing.
Many of the techniques of chemistry, even if they were not initiated, invented by the alchemists, were nevertheless perfected by them. And we're talking about such fundamental operations as crystallization, distillation, sublimation, fundamental processes in chemistry.
If you went into a chemist's laboratory in the middle of the 20th century, you would often see the same sorts of glassware and see the chemists doing the same sort of operations that you would have seen had you walked into an alchemist's lab in the middle of the 17th century.
Alchemy also had a direct effect on some of the world's greatest scientific minds, Isaac Newton in particular.
We have over 1 million words that Newton copied out from alchemical texts. So clearly, he was a very close reader of these texts. We also know that he worked in a laboratory doing alchemical experiments. One of the matter theories that the alchemists held was that matter was made up of tiny corpuscles that could combine and had specific properties. And Newton seems to have borrowed a good deal of this material in his own science.
In both science and fiction, alchemists are making a bit of a comeback. In the book Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore's unseen partner, is said to be 666 years old. The author J.K. Rowling isn't the first to suggest that Flamel didn't die in the early 1400s.
Several centuries later, there are records of him being in India and in Uzbekistan in Central Asia, and even appearing in the opera in Paris in 1870s. Did he acquire the Philosopher's Stone? Perhaps he's still alive today.
John Dee, whose quest for the Philosopher's Stone drove him to despair, is also enjoying a resurgence of popularity.
Dee's works are published and reprinted. They're very popular among New Age spiritualists. You can even buy transcripts of his conversations with the angels in case you want to try this at home. John Dee would have been extremely gratified to know that the fame and recognition that eluded him under Elizabeth I has in some respects been given to him in the 20th and 21st centuries.
As for the alchemist's central ambition of finding the Philosopher's Stone and transmuting substances into gold, that objective is now possible.
We can transmute in the sense that nuclear reactions can take the nucleus of other elements and turn them into the nucleus of gold. But the cost for that in terms of building accelerators, operating them, having the crew and so on, is millions, if not thousands of millions of dollars per microgram of gold. It isn't worth doing.
And what about the stone's other attribute, that of extending human life? For people in the rich West, in an age of wonder drugs, health clubs, and cryogenics, our life expectancy gets longer every year. Though the ultimate prize of eternal life has so far eluded science, the quest continues.
The dream of immortality is certainly a very old and, I think, persistent human dream.
So perhaps the dream of the alchemist is not so absurd.
After the break, Decoding the Past continues with the secrets of the American dollar bill. Could there really be coded messages interwoven within its familiar design?
Hello, my name is GVideo34, and a lot of you don't know that I've suffered for 40 years under archonic abuse. Archonic abuse is the abuse of the archons. There's a lot of information on these beings. I just did a show on them. They can really ruin your life. If you feel the need to be free of the archons like I have, please feel free to get a hold of Christopher S. Jacobs. There's other people probably out there like him that can help you in this manner, but I'll leave you the contact information so he can get a hold of you and free you from these evil bastards. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you next Saturday night as always, hopefully with a cleaner conscience and a cleaner soul. Goodbye. This has been a Fringe feature movie hour. Good night, everybody. Ghosts, UFOs, monsters, Mothman, Chupacabra, the Mandela effect. This and more you will find at the Fringe feature movie hour. All this and more at the Fringe feature movie hour. I will try to scare the pants off of you. Enjoy. Good night.